Welcome to another episode of A Second Helping, the wedding podcast with a focus on second shooting. I'm your host, Allison Bartow, and today I'm thrilled to have a remarkable guest joining us, the talented wedding photographer, Haley McDevitt. Haley is the founder, owner, and lead photographer of Perennial Photography and Creative Studio in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You can catch her stunning work and creative insights on Instagram under the handle Perennial Feels. I was following her on Instagram, and one day a story of hers caught my attention. She was sharing her opinion on when is the right time for a photographer to leave a wedding. Intrigued by her perspective, I knew I had to invite her to share her thoughts with my listeners. So join us for an insightful conversation with Haley McDevitt as we dive into the world of wedding photography, creative storytelling, and perhaps even a bit of controversy. Stay tuned for an episode filled with valuable insights and fresh perspectives. Let's get started. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast today. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Haley McDevitt. I am the lead photographer / founder of Perennial Photography, but my Instagram name's Perennial Feels. People say both, and neither is, preferred. I started doing photography when I was about 18 professionally. Like I'd always had a camera, but never really made money from it and never knew that it could be, like a path for me. So I started working with wedding photographers, assisting them in second shooting. And then eventually once the pandemic hit and I graduated and needed a job, I was like, okay, this is one way to make money. I can hone in on this skill and maybe start something. And then that's kind of what happened. I worked a marketing job as well as doing the photography. And now I'm full-time photography as well as being in grad school.
What year did you go full-time photography?
Just the beginning of this year, actually. Last year. So 2023. My brain's still in 2023.
Yeah, mine too.
So it's been like a full year now.
Congratulations. And are you 26 years old?
I'm 26, yeah.
I saw that on one of your reels and I couldn't believe it. So I just feel like your presence and the way that you come across just feels much wiser than a typical 26-year-old. So
thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I feel like I get that quite often, and then I get that I look way younger. So it's interesting because some people think I look like I'm a teenager still, I guess, depending on, the day.
I think because my first interaction with you online was watching your reels. So it was more your voice and what you were saying. So that's why for me, you felt older,
yeah.
But I can see where someone could say you've got a youthful look. But yeah, just hearing what you were saying, it was the reel where you were talking about not having certain coverage times, not having a limited span on there. So I guess before we get into that, so you started always taking pictures. 18, you started assisting and second shooting. I guess, how did you get that first assisting job? Who was the first person to ask you to help out?
Okay, so he's still a friend to this day. His name's Ryan, and he was my family's photographer. So my mom had hired him to do our family photos, and I'm one of 6. I have 5 younger brothers.
Oh my gosh.
So I naturally was mother henning them and telling them what to do and how to pose. So he knew that I had an eye for it. And then once the shoot was over, he was like, "Do you do this?" And I was like, "Well, no, I love photography. I do it for fun." And he was like, "Would you want to assist me on wedding days? I need some basically female energy, and also just someone to help out with bridal needs and anything else." So I was like, absolutely, this sounds so awesome. And it didn't really come to fruition until 6 to 8 months later. I think he actually messaged my mom on Facebook. I think I might have even been 17 when I first met him, because he was not DMing me. We didn't have each other's numbers. So then he messaged my mom. I did one wedding, and then I would do a couple with him per year throughout college. And it felt like a dream. I would, be doing the usual college week, really busy, super involved, and then I would be off to some random person's wedding is how I looked at it. And at the time I was actually working to pay off my camera that he gave to me. So he gave me one of his old cameras. I would practice at his weddings, and he would always say to me, "Whatever you take is just Easter eggs. Don't be worried, just have fun, explore. If you have questions, come up to me." So he's definitely what made me a huge reason of why I fell in love with photography and weddings in general, because I would see him do the full wedding day and see how taxing it was on his body and how draining it is to like be on all day long. And I was like, I don't know if I could do that for like a living, but this is fun for now. But yeah, once I started to learn more and work more with other photographers, I realized that everyone can find their own style and it doesn't have to be the same for everyone.
So
Yeah.
that sounds like a nice way to transition into it. I know a lot of people are always like, how do you get started? How do you get started? And that seems like a nice fit. And what's his style like as far as like how he interacts with the couple on their wedding day?
He was and was and still is. He does it less frequently now, and he doesn't even do it full time. I don't think that was ever a goal of his to do it full time, but he is definitely more traditional. So he loves, a perfectly framed photo with the couple in the center with like a lot of bokeh in the background, like a classic photographer. I learned, under his wing, obviously, on how to like frame the photos and like find the best light and things like that. So I feel like he taught me the basics and a lot about the camera itself, even. If I would take a picture and I would, go to chimp or I was just looking at it and I didn't understand why it was like so bright, he would be like, oh, that's just your ISO. So he broke it down a lot for me, like how to just take the picture. Though our styles are now very different, I would say we still complement each other well, which is fun on wedding days because he still works for me and I'll still work for him. Yeah, to have both of our styles and perspectives.
It is really nice because I think that makes it really well-rounded. And as he said, it's Easter eggs. So you started second shooting for him and learning a lot. What was your kind of gateway into your first wedding? Or did you start with like an inquiry for an engagement session or portraits? How did that pan out?
Yeah. So my first wedding, like big official wedding that I booked, and I'm not even to say big official because obviously a small wedding is still official, but when I say official, in my mind, it was like it required light, like light stands and flash and just knowledge of a ballroom and how to shoot a wedding that big. It was actually a girl I went to high school with. So I had been promoting some photography things in 2020 and was posting mainly family stuff because that's just like what was easy and I guess like accessible to me at the time. Like I was very easily shooting family things. So once I had posted a lot about that and started to dabble into the couple things, I guess it was, started out with a few couples that I knew. Some people hired me for portraits and then it turned into weddings because of my experience having done weddings because I still had my portfolio. So she actually hired me. Her name's Julia and Frankie. They hired me for a wedding at the Union League. So if anyone's local to Philly, they know that it's a giant venue.
Yeah.
And I remember I like had to fake it till I made it. I was so nervous because I was like, oh my gosh, this is a giant venue. I have to like really get amazing at my lighting, like my lighting knowledge, all of that. But I had about a year and a half to 2 years to prepare. So I was like, okay, I'll have the time. Like now this is just basically the preparation to get to those bigger weddings. And then once I booked that one, it kind of just kept happening that way. Like I had maybe 5 to 10 in that year that I had booked for the future. And then some big, some small. And then once I did that, I actually picked up a lot from the pandemic. I don't know if you remember how hectic that was. You were in the space. You've been a photographer for a while, right?
Yeah, I had taken some time off and was like just getting back into it with the pandemic. So it kind of came into like the whole frenzy of it all.
Yes. And so in that way, I think it worked out well for both of us that we kind of got like the overflow of, let's say photographers had to cancel last second because of they had COVID. And so they had to cancel on their couples. I actually had a few that were like urgently needing photographers that I was able to take right away. So it was like a blessing in disguise, even though it was like obviously scary. I was able to build my portfolio and like really work on my skills that I was learning live that whole year, even though I was like booking out far in advance.
Yeah. So it's nice because you were able, you're normally booking in advance, but then you've got the immediate future and you were able to fill that up, which is nice. Like you said, it wasn't the best circumstance. It was a crazy time because I think prior to that, everyone's like, oh, I'll work through whatever. And, I'm tough and all this. But for the first time ever, it was kind of like, no, if you have this, we don't want you at the wedding. So, it was wild that people were
Yeah.
like the morning of like, oh, I just tested positive and I need help. Or, someone's sick in my house and it's 3 days before a wedding. I'm trying to get like a roster just in case. So it definitely was
Yeah.
wild. So you started, shooting these weddings, and I'm assuming different types of venues, different sizes, and really getting into it. When would you say you started to feel like super comfortable?
I would say I actually have like the pinpointed shift because I found a podcast and it completely changed my perspective. So I'm like a big podcast person, which is why like when you asked me to be on this, I was so excited because I love podcasts. So I listened to Shine and Thrive with Sara Monika. I'm not sure. It's one of the bigger photography podcasts. And I don't even know how I stumbled upon her. I think I was bored at a business conference I was at for my marketing job. And I'm assuming my former boss will never listen to this, so I'll be honest. And rather than like doing a lot of the homework I should have been doing, learning about B2B marketing, I was listening to these podcasts on my break times. I stumbled upon like her method of doing things, fell in love with her style, and then I started to buy her courses. She has a few different courses, one on like how to market yourself as a photographer, how to show up online. And then others, she actually is the person who introduced me to documentary style and like being very free and flexible and making it all about the couple. Because beforehand, I'd worked with a lot of those traditional type of photographers who would, shoot an 8-hour wedding day at a set budget. And then as soon as the clock struck 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at their 8th hour, they'd be like, okay, we're out. And I couldn't understand that because then there were other wedding days where like there were instances where like the wedding clearly didn't go exactly as planned. And there was like a few things that like the photographer missed out on, such as like the cake cutting or even like formal dances with parents that they were like, oh, well, the dinner was late. So, and like, we're only on for 8 hours. So like, I have to go. And I was just like amazed by that. It always made me feel uncomfortable, even at like working on their team. Not even speaking of Ryan would never do that, but just other photographers who I ended up working with later. So yeah, once I found Sara Monika and her style and just like her perspective on it, I like adopted that. And I'm in like her community now. I like still follow her. And it shifted for me. I can pin it to October of 2022, which is funny because it's when I was on that business, trip. And as soon as I like binged her podcast and took all of her courses and like enacted everything that winter. And so for 2023, I felt super confident going into the year, having my newfound style, because before I was still getting weddings and I was still shooting them, but I felt like I was just going through the motions of like being booked and busy, cranking out edits and not really thinking about it and not super present. But then as I found that style of photography, I was like, oh, this is what it should feel like. And this is what I've been searching for this whole time,
It totally makes sense because when I say my first interaction with you on social media, you felt really wise to me. You are so comfortable in your skin and in this role, in this job. And you can tell, and everything, all of your posts and your website, like it just feels like you're in a groove in a good way and you're comfortable. And so that absolutely makes sense to me that you had that experience and like it resonated with you. And you saw someone and kind of maybe the path of like, oh, this is how I can totally be me. And it's an option.
Yes, definitely. And then I feel like once I started to show up that way and actually speak about like reach couples who I wanted to, like, I knew that they're out, like I knew that they were out there, right? Because I would go to weddings or engagement sessions. And when I would have to like pose a couple too much, or like, I say I had like 30 minutes to take couple portraits on a wedding day, I would be like, okay, what else do I do?
Yeah.
Like I was starting to get uncomfortable even watching them be uncomfortable because not everyone wants to pose for that long,
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely shifted. And thank you for saying that, I come off that way because that's my goal. I want to like attract the right people who feel that way because yeah, it's probably hard to find photographers who aren't just like the same old, doing the same poses and trying to like make it into magazines.
Yeah. And also the approach. one of the first photographers, I'd met him at a photo, I think it was a lighting workshop. And so then he reached out to me. So I started second shooting with him. And I was used to his approach, and he was very traditional, and he loves just like a well-lit posed portrait. And that's really what he's interested in. And so for me, the journey of second shooting for a lot of different photographers has been amazing, because I'm like, oh, wow, there are so many different approaches and just how people interact with their clients. And it's been really amazing for me to see that. So I can also recognize it right away, like when I saw you and how you feel in your approach. And I want to say I like that. And it's different than how I think a lot of maybe like more old school photographers, or what people think photographers do on a wedding day. And I think it's hard to, and maybe you can actually probably explain this better than, they always say like you want to market or post for like your desired client. But I think it's sometimes people say like, well, it's hard because how do I get the client that is going to resonate with me so that I have that to post to show people? So how did you, once you knew what your approach was and your style and you wanted to shoot more documentary, how did you start getting things out there to draw in your type of client?
It's crazy to think back on, because it is humbling to think about like where you start, like thinking about how nerve-wracking it is to like put anything out online, and like, it's your art. It's really vulnerable. Like anything you do with photography, although like pictures of other people, it does represent you in some way. So I would say once I found this and like really fell in love with, the way that it made couples feel, the way it made me feel as the artist behind the camera, I started to only post photos that represented that type of that style. So rather than posting the most beautiful photo from the gallery that is the perfectly framed, gorgeous, styled photo, like this is a good example. So I did this wedding in December of 2023, and their names were Catherine and Francesco. It's one of my favorite galleries, and it's one that I actually show to couples before when people inquire. I show them that gallery. It's well-rounded. The couple not only was gorgeous and like had a lot of fun with everything, like they really trusted me. The photos are so versatile because I did get some really traditional portraits, which I don't even usually do. Like I know couples really love them, and I talk to them about what they really expect, right? Before going into it. So one of my favorite photos and the cover photo of the gallery is a picture of the veil over both of them. And they're standing there like nose to nose. It's like really serious, but I could tell it just like fit them as a couple. That's the only reason why I put them in that pose. I don't do that for everyone. I'm not going to try to force myself into the veil of a couple who's like, I don't like PDA, So one, it's about like knowing the couple, knowing what feels like them before you go and post it, because you don't want them to not, love the thing you're sharing. And so rather than posting, for example, that photo as the cover photo of my Instagram, I'd rather post a photo of like her and Francesco walking by this crowd of kids that saw her on her wedding day and like waved at her, because it shows that I'm not just focusing on like, okay, here's the timeline. I have to check off all these photos, and then we're going to go on the trolley, and then et cetera, et cetera. I'm focused on the moments like the in-between of like transitioning from room to room, waiting for mom to open the door and see her, even if it's not a planned first look. So things like that. Like I wanted to show on my Instagram that some of the best moments are the ones that you can't even plan for, because any photographer, sure, you can hire a photographer, and if they know the camera well, they've done a lot of weddings, sure, they can shoot your wedding beautifully. But I want to attract the people who like want those real moments between, their loved ones in the busyness of the day.
Yeah. And to that point, had you posted that photo with the veil, you're more likely to get people that then for their wedding are like, oh, and I want to make sure we get that veil photo. And it becomes like a thing. And you're like, no, it wasn't. It's not. I don't do that.
Yeah. And you find, I'm sure you've seen so many photographers doing this of having a mental checklist in their head. Like, okay, nose to nose, hugging behind, the veil shot. Let's flick the veil. Let's do a walking one. Let's turn around. Like there's so many photos that they would just run through in their heads as a list. And I was like, should I be doing that? Like, do I have to also have this mental list prepared, or can I just be with them and see what feels right?
I think that's smart the way that you're posting. So tell me also, you do a great job with like reels and like video. What are you doing on the wedding? Are you all photography on the wedding day? And then like some video behind the scenes for yourself for content?
Yes. So the videos, thank you, by the way. The video, are you talking about like the behind the scenes videos I've captured
Yeah, like
on the wedding day?
yeah, your couples just there's some really nice, video clips, little reels that you have of your couples. Yeah.
Yes. So I actually have most weddings, I have a second photographer with me, depending on what package the couple books. I recommend one if it's like hundreds of people, and most of my weddings are, as Northeast Philadelphia goes, where I'm like located, it's like Irish Catholic 250 guest count. So like I have a second photographer a lot of the time. I actually have an additional assistant who's with me at pretty much each wedding now because my couples don't pay for that. I pay for it because number one, I love interacting with people. Like I'm an extrovert. So if something goes wrong and I'm like a solo photographer, I'll handle it. But like, I'll be way more anxious if I don't have someone to just like share the energy with. So I found that having me and even an assistant, a non-shooting assistant is better. And what that assistant does for me, this is like one of my secrets that I haven't shared with any other photographer.
Ooh.
So, I mean, now it's broadcasted on a podcast. So I have her shooting video for me, not only for my Instagram, but also for the couple. So it's not that I do videography per se, but it's like raw iPhone video. And then I just give those videos to the couple rather than making, rather than putting the pressure on like a bridesmaid or a family member to take those moments. It's like, she's always there and ready to get those moments. And then the fun part is that I have them for any sort of I'm sorry, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like assets, social media assets that I need. So whether I want to put that on a story, like make a beautiful reel, it's like a minute long and just like shows the full day. I think it's a good way to also show what the wedding day is like with me because she knows to capture the in-between moments like I'm doing.
Yeah.
So it's awesome.
Yeah. So how long has she been working with you?
Since about August. I've had her at every wedding, I think, since like July or August.
Okay. And then what do you tell the couple ahead of time? Do you tell them ahead of time, like, oh, I'm bringing an assistant. She's going to shoot some behind the scenes stuff. So like, what are their expectations before the wedding day?
They don't expect the reel and all of like the bonus videos. It's like a surprise. It's kind of like a surprise and delight that I give to my couples. That way they don't go in with expectations that it's going to be like a video, like a beautifully edited, masterful video.
Yeah.
It's more just like she's there. So what I do say, I obviously just tell them that I'm going to have like a second or third team member, because they have to make sure like the venue can also feed her. So that's the only thing that probably comes up for couples. And no couple has ever complained that there's like a third person, because what's another meal?
Right.
But so yeah, we just make sure that she has a vendor meal. That's the only thing that we really need to consider, because I'm the one usually driving around. It's rare that we'll have like a party bus or like a trolley. So yeah, I just let them know that she's coming. And then in terms of video, like she's obviously there with a phone, like videoing the whole time. So they're likely anticipating that I'll send them something.
Yeah.
But their reaction to the reel afterward, like I don't even tell them that they're going to get that at all. The reaction to the reel afterward is amazing, because it's like, oh my God, like how did you capture all these things?
Yeah.
You know?
And it's funny too, because I think in today's world, there's so much video going on in phones that people don't even notice it. So it's like they might not even realize how much she's actually capturing, because there's so much going on and a lot of people are doing that. So it probably is a real surprise. And that's why I was curious too, because you don't want them to have big expectations. So then it really is just like a bonus, and it's also a win-win for you. I have a couple calls scheduled with the different content creators, because we're seeing more and more wedding content creators that are getting booked by the couple independent of the photographer or the videographer. And I'm curious to talk to them more. I actually did work. I was a second shooter in December, and there was a content creator there, and she was really great. And she's also a second shooter. So I feel like she kind of knew the rules of the game and how to interact with everybody. But I am very curious for people, like obviously your assistant. What do you call her? Your assistant?
Yeah, she's like we're like good friends now, so it's funny calling her my assistant. But she's essentially, that's exactly what it is. She's a content creator for the day, but the couples don't know that, because it is a bonus. Like I'm kind of piloting it.
Yeah.
But then for 2025 weddings, I'm actually now like marketing that as an add-on to the package, because if they want more, they can also get everything delivered. I can store them in a Dropbox or like, a cloud folder for them.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
And so I think like with her, you trained her so that she knows exactly how to quote unquote behave at a wedding. And I'm just curious
Yeah.
what we're going to see when we have like, say, I just imagine like college age girls that are good on their phones and good with reels and TikToks that start doing this. Like, I feel like it could be a bit of a bump in the road if they're not used to like the hierarchy of how, because we have enough challenges sometimes with photographers and videographers. So I feel like someone who hasn't had that experience yet, it might be problematic, but I think there's a huge market for it. And I think what you're doing is great because you're getting the content for your social media as well as that bonus for them. So I think that's smart. Are there any YouTube, in addition to like that podcast, and it sounds like you're really into Sara's whole community, which I'm absolutely going to check out. Were there any other like YouTube videos or like any other instructors along the way when you were first getting started that you learned from?
Honestly, none that stand out enough. Like I've worked with friends, of course. I can't not give credit where credit's due to the other photographers who I've shadowed or second shot for, of course. Like there's a laundry list of them. So yeah, learning, like if I'm talking to someone who wants to expand more and get into photography, as you could probably second that, um, assisting and being a second shooter to so many wedding photographers is invaluable. You can't anticipate what you'll learn, but as you practice, it's just so nice to pick up on things that they do, even if it's not something that you want to adopt right away. You could even look at how they're doing something and like tweak it just a little bit to make it your own, way.
Yeah. It's cool. I even enjoyed seeing everything from like how people do their timelines or how they communicate about timelines. And then behind the scenes, I've seen like contracts and you see
Yeah.
so much, even some of the workflow stuff, because sometimes they'll just forward me an email and then I can see like all the communication going back. So you can see how they set expectations. Some people are, I think you had said, like 5 months out, you're finalizing some things. And then 2 months out, you're like finalizing the details in the timeline, which is like a
Yeah.
comfortable time frame for me. And then I work with some people where it's 3 days before and they're like, "Oh, can I get a timeline?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And everyone's different, but it's interesting
Yeah.
to see because sometimes I've seen things where I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's how I would never want to do it." And I'm sure you've seen that with certain things too, where it was like a red flag, like, "Okay, remind me never to do this."
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's such a good point. That's like a whole other aspect that no, I feel like no one, people who don't understand the photography or aren't exposed to it, like the workflow, everything behind the scenes, all the email communication, that's like its own beast. Like I feel like that's half, if not 75% of my job, handling the emails and making sure everyone's taken care of. Because especially as weddings come up, those questions do come up for photographers. A lot of the times, if there's no planner or coordinator, photographer is
Yeah.
both roles.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's such a good point that like learning, like shadowing and just like building your own little squad of photographers who you trust and who you can learn from is awesome.
Yeah, because there's a lot because the most couples, it's their first wedding and it's been a
Yeah.
while since their parents got married and who knows
Yeah.
if their friends have been married. So it's like you're the expert and it's a heightened situation, whether heightened emotions, financial, like all these pressures. And so it's a lot to, make sure it's going smoothly. What I guess with regards to that and workflow, what have you implemented, like whether it's from like a behind the scenes technology standpoint or templates or how's that evolved for you?
That's a good question. So I I use Honeybook.
Okay.
I know two of the popular ones for photographers are Honeybook and Dubsado. So I hear Dubsado is superior because you can like stack automations better. And if you're not familiar with stacking automations, it's essentially what I do in Honeybook is I have automated workflows that are customized, a little bit customized depending on the email. So like some can be uniformly sent because it's just a questionnaire. It's like, hey, such and such, like, hey, Allison, your wedding's coming up in a few months, and that's just what I send out on like 5 months away. Rather than some of the other emails, I do have to read through and make sure I tweak to adjust to the couple, and it is still personal. So I have these automated emails set up, and I was just doing that on the fly and letting Honeybook was kind of like ruling my world at one point. Are you familiar? Do you use Honeybook or
I
a
don't.
CRM?
I started using Sprout Studio. I feel like it's newer, but I know people love Honeybook and I know people love Dubsado. And I used to hear 17 Hats a lot, and I feel like I don't hear that as much as I used to.
Okay. So I have no major qualms with Honeybook anymore. I did get stressed when like I would have a billion notifications. Like it just depends on how you set up your automations. If you set up your automations to say like, remind me to send this email as a task, like create a task for me to send this questionnaire 2 months out from this person's wedding day. What it would do is create a task, and then if you didn't immediately look at it right away, you could have a built up task list of like 17 items just to send something. When really, what you could be doing is have it automatically send for you. So I learned this. I actually hired a Honeybook slash Dubsado expert because I like a workflow expert. She was great. It's Chloe G on Instagram
Okay.
at it's dot Chloe dot G. And she has these services, like customizable services on how to make your workflow work for you and also have like a great customer experience for your couples. I would highly recommend finding someone like her or her. She was incredible. And so what she helped me do is learn practically how to maximize everything in Honeybook and make it work for me. So now rather than attaching PDFs of like pricing guides,
Okay.
I actually use the Honeybook smart files. And the Honeybook smart files they're brand new, I would say like as of the last year. And so rather than me creating and manually shifting a Canva document and making it pretty and caring about every little thing in there, I save time by just having the smart file in there and it's integrated into Honeybook. So that way when I'm sending, let's say, a questionnaire, it's beautiful, but it's also a smart file. So I don't even need to look at it before it gets sent out. So that has helped me immensely because rather than feeling like I'm bogged down by email and not caught up on making sure that 5 months out, all of my couples have what they need, I know that it's working.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
You're not in the weeds with all of those things. And it's important because the timing you want down. So I think that's a great tip when it comes to like AI and culling and any of that. Are you using any services for that, like Aftershoot or Narrative Select or anything?
I'm not, but I will say Sara Monika has an awesome podcast on like her culling formula that I have now used and swear by. So culling used to take me, I would dread it. Like I would, rather than coming home from a wedding and feeling like super energized or even like the next couple days, knowing that it was like looming over me that I had to go through, thousands and thousands of photos. But so she basically breaks it down so that you know that you only need a few pictures, like a certain amount of pictures per moment. So now when I go through, it probably takes me like 3 hours to look through 10,000 photos,
Wow.
which is crazy.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty good.
I think that's
Because other
amazing.
photographers I know, yeah, like other photographers I know of, they're like, oh my God, like it takes me a full day to go through a wedding. And rather than like being super attached to the photo, I'm just like, okay, they only need like 5 of this, even if it's a really good moment. Or if, let's say for documentary style, oh, let's say it's even like any wedding would have this. Let's say it's like a toast or a speech. I have in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get perspective shots. Like, let's say the dad of the bride is giving a speech. Perspective shot of what he looks like giving the speech, the couple themselves, what they look like looking at their dad, what the crowd looks like. So I look at it as like one big room, and I'm going to get every single aspect of every perspective. And then let's say like he cracks a joke, everyone laughs, they do a cheers. I only need, a couple of those laughing pictures because they're all going to look the same at the end, you know? So just making sure you're not like overdoing it and just like you find a good one, then you move on from the moment rather than like looking at them and being like, oh God, but do they need all 15 of these? They're so good. Then it saves you time on editing too,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
huge. I'm going to listen to that too,
Yeah.
because I know for me, when I'm looking at pictures and like 5 images that are like almost the same, I totally psych myself out because I'm like, well, everyone's really particular about how they look. And so, I mean, do they need 2 of this that are a little bit different because they might prefer one over the other? And it's so
Yeah.
stupid. But in the moment, I get like paralyzed of like, how do I make the choice? And you're right. You pick the best of the best, and they're not going to see the other ones. So,
Yeah, and they'll love the ones that they love anyway. Like they're not to say like they're not going to know the ones we don't send them. Like they should trust you that they hired you already and you're going to send them the ones that are the best. The other thing, another mindset thing that I do, and this is just like in my own brain, I came up with this like in calling. I kind of think of it as like, what if I was a film photographer and like this was the only moment I got, right? Rather than because with our cameras, we could just like click, 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 click and get 10 photos of the same second. And so it would drive you nuts trying to keep all of them. So rather than thinking of it that way, it's like, if this were a film photo, which one's the keeper?
Yeah.
And then that kind of helps me when I'm really stumped.
That's a good one. I like that. Do you go in
Yeah.
order? I know some people think they work backwards better.
I go in order. Yeah. And if anything, if I'm like, let's say I start one night and it's kind of late, I break it up by section. And so I'll do, getting ready, straight to first look. And then if I'm like, let's say by ceremony time, I'm like, I can't even look at this anymore. I'll just like resume the next time, kind of like a chapter of a book. I look at it, it's like, I'm not really gonna like end in the middle of a chapter. So I try to finish each section when I'm sitting down.
That's good advice. I need to do that. I've heard other people do that. And I'm like, oh, it literally is more manageable bites to break it up like that. The one photographer I shoot for, she actually takes out her memory card and puts in a new memory card for the different moments. So at the end of the night, she has like getting ready, first look, ceremony. It's not for me, but I was like, oh, that's an interesting way to do it. So, but it just seems like
that would stress me out.
It seems more stressful for me, but that's her method. So she works with that. So when you're culling, do you use like Photo Mechanic or like anything? Okay, Photo Mechanic.
Yeah, I use Photo Mechanic. I love it. I just go through and I hit 5 for my keepers, or maybe even 3, whichever one's green. I think I do 3.
So it's black and white. Black and white meaning keep or no. There's nothing like you don't do like 2 passes and go back.
Sometimes I do passes if it's like a day where I'm like, okay, I've really ripped through 2,000 or 10,000 pictures in 2 hours. Like maybe I missed a couple. I'll go through like the key parts of the day. I'll try to think of like the moments that happen rather than like, okay, like let me look through the entire ceremony again, or let me look through the full morning. I'll be like, wait, did I get enough photos of like the bride with her mom? Or, she mentioned that her brother's really important to her. Like maybe I could like go through and just make sure I got all the good ones of them. That's the only time I really do like a second pass. And then obviously, naturally, if you're looking through the wedding gallery and you feel like it's a little bit like too slim in one area, you could always go back. But
it seems like a good system.
I find that going through, I find that going through quicker it's just gonna make me happier. And it's like once you have the formula, I can even send you the document that I have on like building your culling formula. It's like 10 parts. You basically go through and like you say how like you stick to it by saying like, okay, I'm only gonna keep. Let's say I need 10 photos of the ceremony, his perspective, her perspective, or like bridegroom, or if they're a heterosexual couple, and then like reaction shots, the parents, and then like what you need, and then anything else is bonus. That's kind of how I look. And what's amazing is that I land at pretty much the same exact number every single time, which is crazy. It's like 1,000, basically like 1,000, give or take 100.
I like that because it's like a menu and a checklist, but it's also like an assignment. Like, here's what you need to do versus it's the world's your oyster and you go in and you're like, oh my, it's so much. So I'd love to read that. That sounds good. And then with your editing and your style, did it take you a long time to land on like your style of editing?
It did. It took me a while to find a preset that I loved that worked for every shoot and every couple. It's a lot. Like, and that's another thing that I go back to. It's like PTSD thinking about how hard it was to find just a preset that works. And it sounds so dramatic, but it would be stressful when you go through a wedding. Like before I had my preset, like my own presets now that I love, I felt like I would send a gallery and not be super proud of it. Or I would like hyperfixate and be like, they're not going to love this. This isn't really like what I'm going for. But, it looks really clean and it's bright and airy like everyone else is, and maybe this is right. So I definitely dabbled in quite a few. I wouldn't say I wasted money. I just bought presets that I thought would work and explored the waters. That's like a really tough phase of finding, of like being a photographer, is finding the presets that you love.
What are the venues that you prefer to shoot at? Do you have like ballrooms, barns? Like, do you have a preferred type of venue?
I would say I do anything really. Like I don't turn away anyone if that like helps narrow it down. I know some people won't shoot in churches, some people won't do farmy kind of weddings. Like my 2024 is a wide range. I think I have everything. Like I have city to, farm to beach, which I'm really excited for. I think that it helps me to take on a bunch of different circumstances because I I don't like feeling like everything's the same, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought a while ago that, you know, the best way to get my name out there and market would be to like get on venues preferred vendors lists. And that's definitely like it's a great way, especially if you love that venue. But I think I would like if I shot like 8 weddings in the same year at the same venue, I would have a hard time like making them feel different and like differentiating just the art myself.
I
You
feel
know?
like that's where, and that's maybe where a couple of the photographers that I work with feel more formulaic. If you're in the same venue, it's like, you know where the good light is, you know where the good spot is. So you're going to naturally go back to those places. So I can see where then they end up in like a routine. So yeah, to your point,
Yeah.
the variety is good because, you know, it
Yeah.
keeps it fresh.
And I like the challenge. Like I can apply that same idea to shooting in Center City. So I live in Center City.
Okay.
And I love it here. Love shooting in the city. If I had to like pick a spot, I'd always prefer a busier, messier background, such as the city, over a farm or like a blank canvas, because I find that documentary style works better with real things that are happening and like an imperfect background. Pedestrians walking on the streets and, you know, like posing outside and you see like TD Bank in the background and it's not just City Hall. Like making it so that it's actually cinematic is easier for me when I have things like real things rather than a field. I struggle because it's like, okay, like we walked around the field. What do we do now? You know? So
Center City's your favorite.
Yes. So it's my favorite and it's difficult not to fall into the, okay, well, like I know these 5 spots are awesome and every couple loves them. So let's just rinse and repeat and do that for the next engagement session. I did that for a while and eventually I was like, I hate engagement sessions. Like, what is my like? I can't stand these anymore. And like after like peeling back the layers, I was like, oh, I just have to move around more. Like I'm just doing the same thing because I fell into it, you know. But that's like another tip I would say. It's just like if you're feeling bored or if you're not inspired by each couple's story and you're feeling like everything looks the same in your portfolio, you have to actually scout locations and walk around more. And even if it's not scouting locations and just simply walking down an alleyway that's like not, you know, it's like off the beaten path, try that instead of doing the basic beautiful architecture in the background, you know?
And you had said at one point too, finding out like what their hobbies are and what they enjoy doing and kind of segueing from that to get some different ideas, which I thought was good because then it's going to be unique, but it's authentic to them and it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, rather than creating a styled portrait or styled shoot that's, you know, like, okay, let's get takeout pizza and sit on the beach. If they never do that, then that's awesome for your portfolio. But like they'll have so much more fun and really appreciate the photos more if they do the things that you're making them do.
Exactly. So kind of along those lines, but kind of not, because you were talking about like engagement sessions and all of that. So putting your packages together, what was that evolution like for you? Because you obviously do engagement sessions. You sometimes have second shooters and you sometimes don't. Where have you landed with what your options are for couples?
It was a long road of transitioning. It was difficult, obviously, to like find the right pricing for myself and evolve and make sure that I felt really proud of my prices and didn't feel guilty for charging so much. You know, that's a whole other conversation. As I got more confident, it was easier to like land where I'm at now, which I'm super happy with where I'm at with my prices. Like I feel I started at 5,000 and I actually have that on my website. That's another thing I think every photographer should do is have your starting prices, just starting. You don't have to put all of your packages out in the public, but your starting prices, because then you immediately limit the people who will inquire because they see that starting number and they're not shocked to see that your prices are however they are.
Right.
So, and then like, you know, they might not inquire if they know that you're out of budget. So I think that it was like liberating to share my starting prices.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I include my starting package is me all day coverage. So it's not like broken down by hours. It's 8 to 12 hours. So they know that they're getting me all day. And then my next tier might be like second shooter and engagement session. My next tier might be second shooter engagement session, flat lay album. So it depends. I don't know exactly how it's broken out, you know, to the T, but that's basically it. Like I build based on services rather than building on hours.
Yeah. What was it? You said flat lay album. Is that what you said? Okay.
Yes.
Now, when you say like unlimited coverage, do you cap it like 8 to 12? Like, do you give them a range?
Yes. And I put that in the contract as well. And then I would say it's the thing I get the most questions about because it is nerve wracking to people. Like, okay, well, if I'm signing up for 12 hours and I'm paying for 12 hours, then I want 12 hours. But I don't necessarily get that question a lot. It's more like, they're like, what does this mean? Like, you get to just create the timeline and you're there however long you want to be.
Well, when
And
I
I'm
get
just like,
tired,
well,
if my feet hurt, I'm out.
yeah, right. I'm not just like bouncing at 8 because I'm tired. Exactly what you said. Like, I'm gonna make sure it's back to the point before of like, did the first dance happen? Did they cut their cake? Is there some tradition at the end of the night that they really want captured that's not typical of other people's weddings that I should be aware of, rather than bouncing when I think everything's done and hoping for it.
Yeah.
We have those conversations before. So, and then I'm honest. I say like, the average wedding does fall around 10 to 11 for me, but that's not everyone's wedding, because every photographer experiences that where you're on the dance floor for, let's say, 3 hours and you're like, God, like there's nothing else to capture. No one's dancing right now. And you're bound to the timeline.
And it's the same 4 people out there and they're just getting drunker and
Yes.
drunker. And you're like, I can't
And they're taking off their shirt and like, you don't want to put this in your portfolio anyway. So you're like, I wish I could just leave. And so I hated being in that position. And that's what I'm just really honest with them. I'm like, I've seen so many weddings at this point and this happens every time, but I built this flexibility so that way you don't feel like you have to pay me X amount of dollars more for an additional hour. And like everything that could possibly be needed to be captured is within that time frame. I love it. It was, again, I'm going to use the word liberating. It was very freeing to just like not have to worry about like, okay, going into the wedding, is this an 8-hour package? Is this a 10-hour package? I just know that I build it based on their needs.
I like it. I'm going to go back and reevaluate how I'm doing things because, well, several reasons. One, you end up going back and forth with the timeline because I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, if we do this to here, that doesn't fit. You got to shift it in this. I know photographers that'll have like their end time, say the end time's 10. So it's like they will have the conversation ahead of time. Like, I'll check in with you before I leave. And if you want to extend coverage, it's this much per hour and it's in the contract. And, we've got to get paid, And I've been there when people have gone up to the parents of the bride to be like, hey, our 15 minutes until, our end time, do we have everything? And that goes okay. Like I've never seen it be a problem. But at the same time, it's kind of funny when you think about like how hard you work to market people and how many conversations we have with couples and consults and calls and follow-up and questionnaires and all of this. And then the day of their most important day when you're there trying to capture everything, like 30 minutes or 60 minutes actually matters in the long run.
That's what I mean.
I think where I was in the other camp was and you're not saying this, which is what I kind of thought you were saying initially when I listened to your reel. You're not saying unlimited coverage because the one guy that I work for says that. He's like all day coverage. And so it's like, and they're going to say like, oh, we're getting ready at 7 a.m. Well, those first
that's happened to me before.
3 hours, they're no eyelashes, no makeup, in robes. No one wants those photos. And then your early start time, you're going to get tired faster. And so that's where I was always like, well, I don't want to be there. And I always tell people like, oh, we're going to get there a little bit before makeup's wrapping up so we can get some details and things like that. And then through cake cutting is when we want to like have our end time. And then you kind of build the timeline around that, which makes sense. But so the drawback for me was like, oh, if you tell them it's unlimited, they're going to want to take advantage in the sense that like, oh, let's get my money's worth. So 7 a.m. till midnight.
Party.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it sounds like you're just framing it in a better, how do you deal with your start time then?
I do the same thing that you do. So I would say most of my weddings, I have 2 photographers. Let's say it's a wedding that I'm doing solo. The day usually ends up being a little longer for me because I'm extending my morning. I'll start out with, if it's a bride and groom, I start out with the groom's getting ready and I spend about 45 minutes with him and his guys because they don't need as much attention. They can kind of like work around a photographer's timeline. They'll throw on their suits, they'll get ready, they'll have fun. I transition to the bridal suite, to the bride's getting ready and, spend about an hour and a half with them, hour to an hour and a half, depending on what their needs are. The way that I started is I just make sure, same thing you said, like the end of the makeup, make sure I get some details, have some time to capture those things in the morning. A lot of the times we'll do like a parent first look or a bridal party first look. So I just make sure that everything they want's included and I'm there for the morning. But if there is two photographers, it's simpler. It's just that I'm there for about an hour and a half with the girls.
Mm-hmm.
And I say girls and guys because most of my clients have been heterosexual couples. So I just want to be mindful of that. We will stay with the bridesmaids in the morning, and then the second shooter will be with the groomsmen, and then we meet at either first look or ceremony. So it's pretty simple to me. But I do understand the whole like my time is valuable thing. I obviously do get like there's 1 in a million or 1 in 100 people might say like, oh well, we're getting ready at 7 and the after party's until 1. Like we expected you to be there, and it's like, well, no, that's not how any wedding would ever work unless you wanted to hire me for 2 straight days, because then I'm not sleeping. I'm driving to your wedding, which is an hour and a half away. And
then you're driving home at like the middle, like you're exhausted driving home with everything. And, yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. It's not safe. It's not sustainable. So no, that's not how it works, but that's rare. Like that's, I think like the biggest fear around it. And that's not going to really happen.
Yeah. I like it. I'm going to revisit everything now.
Oh, good.
No, I was just going to say, like, I like how you layer in the additional services then. So it's not just like one price all day. They can get, other services. So it's still customizable, which I think is nice.
Yeah, definitely. And also like psychologically, I learned this from
Sarah?
My business mentor, not Sarah. So we had initially talked to her before we started recording, talked about her before we started recording, Ashley Pollard.
Oh, right.
So I hired her as my business mentor, and we talked about pricing and pricing psychology. And a big thing that I don't think, photographers likely aren't going to business school. And if they have, I've been to business school, and business school doesn't teach you how to price yourself, price packages. They don't talk about the actual things that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So learning about how like the tiered packages, it helps. It's good to know that you're getting a better discount than the top package, but you're not, you have options, so that it's good to look at more than just one thing.
Yeah.
And obviously there's such thing as going overboard and offering them too many options, but a happy 3 is a good place to be because they're giving them options to choose from.
They still are in control. No, I like that a lot. And I feel, and obviously it's been working for you. You seem super happy with it and haven't had like an issue with it. So that's interesting because I would say most of the people I work with do like a set number of hours. But I have found that where I'm like, sometimes at the reception, I'm like, oh, this is actually like a good reception. And a lot of times receptions get kind of boring fast, but a lot of times like good stuff is happening. And that's kind of like, we're really tired at that point. But at the same time, like we've gotten everything that we need to get. You feel good. You feel like, I've got all my safe shots. I've got my good shots, like everything. So this is just kind of like icing on the cake. So it's to be like, time to pack up. You're like, finally I'm like at ease and just having fun. So, and practicing with different lighting things and, getting creative. So I like that.
That's such a good point too. Like I have the most fun. I wouldn't say it's my favorite part of the night is the reception. Cause like you said, some receptions get super dry. Some dinners go way too long and, you want to just be like, oh gosh, I just can't wait to be in bed. But I would say like a lot of my couples, like they do have really, really fun dance floors. And then I feel like I'm finally letting loose. I'm getting to like enjoy the time with my couples more and I'm bonding with them. And that I would argue would help you get referrals because if you're having fun and like you're dancing like everyone else, they're going to see you as a photographer who's like a human and not just some like fly on the wall in camouflage clothing, just like waiting to leave,
Yeah. Well, and especially because remember Jasmine Star, her first wedding that she stumbled into just so happened to be the perfect storm where she did well and the stage in life where the wedding party, she got like 8 weddings from the people that were in the wedding party and it just kicked off her whole career. But it was one of those things where same thing. She was getting along with them. They had a great time interacting with her. So when it came time for them to get engaged and book a wedding, they immediately went to her.
It's a no-brainer.
And I think that's so important the day of that you're making it a comfortable process because, the bridesmaids sometimes are having all sorts of issues and they're, upset. The guys aren't psyched for photos. So if you can make that a smoother process, do you find it really funny at the end of the night when people come up and they're like, oh my God, you did such a great job. And it's like, they haven't seen a single photo.
Yeah.
But they're like, you did and they're so serious about it. I'm always like, it means a lot to me. But in my head, I'm also like, you don't even know if I have a memory card in here.
Yeah,
I just,
no, I've had that same experience so many times. It is funny.
yeah, and it just goes to show like you did make an impression then because everything else around the actual photos is making a difference. And I had one mom who at the very end of the night, she came up to me and she's like, as you know, I have 7 kids. And she was like, you have been the best to work with. And it like meant so much to me because obviously she's had this experience over and over again. And so it was just reassuring to know that like the other elements that you bring to the day have a big impact as well. Just like, your energy, your personality, how you interact, and just they can tell that you care because you can't put on an act for like a full 8 to 12 hours.
Yeah, you really can't. And to that point, the connection piece with everyone, with I call them the VIPs, with everyone who's there all day, they're also watching you, but their emotions are also high. Like you don't know who's contributed to the wedding financially. That's a big factor. You don't know, like you have to obviously know who they're super close with. I would hope like that more photographers would do their due diligence in understanding dynamics of families and friends and all of that. But yeah, like you can't the other like what I was getting at is if you are stressed about the timeline and you're rushing them through getting their dress on because you're worried about getting to the ceremony on time, like you're the only one ruining it. Like the ceremony will still happen. Like it's gonna wait for everyone to get there. Don't worry. And if the timeline, if it's not perfect, it's fine. So rather than rushing them through a moment, like let's say the bride gets a gift from her mom and she's like reading the sentimental letter, rather than being like, okay, like chop chop, we gotta go. It's like, are you kidding? It's like a real thing that's just happening, which is why I prefer to be there longer because I'm like, then I feel like loosey goosey and I could do any, like I'm just flowing with the day.
Yeah.
I'm there and there's no, problems with the timeline.
It's a huge difference because I also feel like that too. Like when I show up, it's like I've weighed in on the timeline and all of that, but it's like I'm only going to do so much the day of to like keep things on
Mm-hmm.
schedule because you can't interfere to the point where you are a distraction and like ruining the day because you have their timeline to stick to. At the end of the day, it's their day. They can do what they
Yeah.
want. So it's like, a little bit, but I've seen people get just photographers that are so hell bent on that timeline. And I'm like, we're not getting a report card from someone about like our timing. It's the experience for the couple. So
Yeah.
it makes a big difference. All right. So
Definitely.
real quick, what camera ecosystem are you on? What brand do you shoot with?
I'm Nikon. How
You
are you?
are
What are you?
Nikon. I'm Nikon.
Oh my gosh, we have to talk after this. I'm like, I need a second shooter for 2024, 2025. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And it's like a bonus when we're on the same gear.
Yeah. So I guess when you started shooting, when did you get in? Are you mirrorless?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm actually hybrid. I
Mm.
still love my DSLR so much for certain things. Yeah, I go back and forth. I have 3 cameras, 1 DSLR, 2 mirrorless. I lean heavily on mirrorless, but I love the DSLR for focus reasons. I think that it's way easier to back button focus and like get the exact thing I need, like the feeling, rather than mirrorless. I feel like the autofocus is kind of wonky sometimes.
The learning curve on the focusing system took way long. Even when I thought I was getting it, like months later, I'm like, oh, I'm still getting it. Like there's so many advantages, but the focusing is definitely different. And then lenses. What's your approach? Are you primes, zooms, combination?
Only prime, and I shoot every wedding on a 35 and an 85.
And that's it.
That's it.
Do you have anything else in your bag?
I have a lot in my bag. So I have a suitcase.
Wait, so back up though. I want to hear all about this. But lenses, do you have any other lenses in your bag other than those two?
I have a 50 millimeter
Okay.
that I have as like a backup.
Okay. All right. So just
But otherwise,
35.
that's it.
All right. I love it. Okay. Now tell me about all your other stuff in your bag.
Yeah, my stuff in my bag, I have flat. Well, first of all, I have like 7, 8 batteries at all times charged, pretty much. A bunch of like chargers in there in case. On camera flashes, like overhead flashes, Godox for each of my 2 cameras for like the dance floor or, the entrances and things like that, speeches.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have off camera flashes, also Godox, 2 of them at all times with my light stands, like in a separate bag, and then like all the things I need for my light stands. And then I don't really go heavy on a styling kit. I have a few things like nooks and crannies to make it pretty, but I don't have a huge styling kit because I like to just shoot things that are there.
And you're in the city. You can't have a lot of
Yeah.
stuff.
1 suitcase is all I really have now, which is awesome. I fit everything in the same suitcase, which is great. And then if I have light stands, I have a separate bag. It's like a carry-on size.
Okay. Oh, because you only have 3 lenses total.
If I even bring the third. The only time I bring the third is honestly if I want my assistant to like have fun on the like I'm kind of I want to treat her like Ryan treated me in the beginning. Like she wants to learn it and she wants to like maybe eventually be a photographer / even like my second shooter. So if it's like a wedding where like I know that there's like a lot of people or there's definitely going to be time for her to explore, I'll bring my third camera for her and the lens. But otherwise I only will bring my 2 cameras.
Yeah. So 3585, interesting. I like it. Did that take you a while to get to that point where you were just shooting with the primes, or right away you knew?
Right away I knew. I would say I started with just like my kit gear, which was just a 50 millimeter. And then I'm pretty simple when it comes to gear. Like I know people who are like, I want to switch over to Canon. It's so much better. I want to switch to Sony, or they like go back and forth. And I'm like, I like my system. I'm happy with it. The couples are happy with their photos. Like I'm not so much of a gear nerd that I'm like, I want to explore every brand at this moment in time. Like I'm happy with what I have. And I think that keeping it simple and keeping the lenses on my cameras just eliminated so much stress.
So I guess any final tips? I love everything you said about like your pricing and your approach and like getting your ideal clients. Anything, you have a really great social media presence. So any final tips for people?
A few different tips around social media. One, people think about like how you look at social media. Everyone does it mindlessly. Like we look at social media when we're on the toilet. We look at social media when we're waiting in an office. We look at social media when we're just distracted, right? You're scrolling through so quickly. So like, don't overthink what you're posting or your caption. Nothing has to be perfect. You don't have to use all the right hashtags. Just like post anything. Like I think one of my biggest pet peeves with photographers and what I wish every photographer would stop doing is getting on their story and being like, sorry, I took a hiatus. Like I've been so busy. It's like, no one noticed that you were so busy. You're just drawing attraction to your profile now that you haven't posted on in 6 months. Just post.
Right. The other
don't
thing
apologize.
Is I just wanted to hop on here. I don't care.
Yes.
You don't have to say I just wanted to hop on here. Just start talking.
Just talk. That's like such a thing.
But I agree with that too. When people are like, "Hey, you've probably noticed I haven't been here." It's like, no, not at all.
No one noticed. You see 10% of the people that you actually follow, and odds are, unless they're your biggest fan, they haven't been missing you. Sorry.
No.
So like, stop. That honestly, I probably did the same thing like back like a little bit ago. But once I like had that mindset shift, I was like, oh, no one cares. Like just post and don't think about like, I understand like the aesthetic feed, but like really who cares? Like stop trying to make your feed so perfect and wasting time about like scheduling things so that your feed is just beautiful. It's like just if you love a picture, share it. And if it gets 10 likes, who cares?
Yeah, because at least you're posting something. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So that would be like my top advice.
Awesome. All right.
Social media.
Well, I'm going to wrap up and say thank you so much. Yeah. And I will include in the notes where everybody can find you because your hashtag is perennial feels. And I also love that name.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to A Second Helping. Please like and subscribe.
Yeah, we could fly so